Imagine being accused of a crime that no one can see. Your neighbors say your invisible spirit attacked them while your real body stood across the room. You deny it. They collapse. The court treats their suffering as evidence against you. In Salem in 1692, that nightmare became a legal system. For the Salem witch trials are often remembered as frightened Puritans. Hysterical girls and innocent women burned at the stake. Almost every part of that picture needs correction. No convicted Salem victim was burned. 19 people were hanged. Giles Corey died while being pressed under heavy stones after refusing to enter a plea. At least 5 more people died in jail. At least 160 people were accused, with some modern official counts exceeding 200. 8. The story began in Salem Village, now Danvers, Massachusetts. In the winter of 1692, 9-year-old Elizabeth, or Betty, Paris, and her cousin, Abigail Williams, about 11, began suffering disturbing fits. Their community believed witchcraft was real, criminal, and potentially punishable by death. By February, suspicion turned toward Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, an enslaved woman in Reverend Samuel Parris's household who was identified in the records as Indian. On February 29, 1692, warrants were issued for the 3 women. Their examinations began on March 1st. Good and Osborne denied the accusations. Tituba confessed and described a wider diabolical conspiracy. That confession transformed a local accusation into something larger. If several witches were working together, every new name could seem like proof that an invisible network existed. This is where the machinery of Salem became terrifying. The accused did not face only ordinary testimony about things they had supposedly done. Accusers also gave spectral evidence, claims that the spirit or apparition of a person had appeared and attacked them. The problem was impossible to solve. How do you prove where your spirit was while you were physically somewhere else? The crisis expanded through the spring. Respectable church members were accused, so were men. So were people outside Salem Village. On May 27th, Governor William Phips created a special court of Oyer and Terminer to hear the mounting cases. Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton became its Chief Justice. Bridget Bishop was the first person tried by the new court. She was convicted and hanged on June 10th. On July 19th, 5 more people were hanged, including Rebecca Nurse, a woman in her 70s whose reputation had once made the accusation against her difficult for many neighbors to believe. By then, the lesson was brutal. Status, church membership, age, and respectability were no protection. The system also created a deadly incentive. Confession could delay or avoid execution. Maintaining innocence could move a defendant toward the gallows. Surviving records contain confessions later described as false or coerced. Martha Tyler, for example, said she had been pressured until she finally admitted almost anything proposed to her. In a court searching for a conspiracy, a confession produced new names, and new names produced new cases. On August 19th, 5 more people were hanged, including John Proctor and former Salem Village minister George Burroughs. In mid-September, Giles Corey refused to plead. Stones were piled on his body to force a plea, and he died under the pressure. On September 22nd, 8 people were hanged in the final mass execution. One of them was Mary Easty before her death. Easty petitioned the authorities not simply for herself, but to prevent more innocent blood from being shed. Her appeal exposes the central tragedy of Salem. The people inside the crisis were not all blindly convinced. Doubt existed while the executions were still happening. That doubt kept growing. Ministers and other critics challenged spectral evidence. Increase Mather argued that the innocent must not be endangered in the pursuit of the guilty. Governor Phips dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer at the end of October. When a new superior court began hearing the remaining cases in January 1693, under tighter standards, convictions became far harder to obtain, executions stopped, and the jails were gradually cleared. So what caused Salem? There is no single answer that survives serious scrutiny. The famous theory that contaminated rye caused hallucinations was proposed in the 20th century, but a detailed rebuttal in science argued that the pattern and symptoms did not fit convulsive ergotism. Historians instead point to a convergence of forces: belief in witchcraft, local conflict, political instability, fear shaped by warfare on the northern frontier, religious tension, personal grievances, and a legal process that gave extraordinary power to accusations that could not be independently tested. That last point matters. Salem was not simply a story about people who believed strange things. Many educated people in the 17th century Atlantic world believed witchcraft was possible. What made Salem catastrophic was the way belief interacted with institutions. Accusations became evidence. Confessions generated more accusations. Doubt was treated as danger. A court created to solve a crisis helped amplify it. The aftermath did not erase the damage. In 1697, Judge Samuel Sewall publicly accepted blame and shame for his role. In 1711, Massachusetts reversed some convictions and provided restitution to families, but no apology could return the dead. The most useful lesson of Salem is also the least supernatural. A society does not need real witches to create a witch hunt. It needs fear, a convincing story about an enemy, incentives to accuse, and institutions willing to reward certainty before evidence. In 1692, those pieces locked together. Ordinary neighbors could look at one another and see not a person, but a threat. That is why Salem still matters. The horror was not that an invisible enemy took over a village. The horror was that real people, using real courts and real authority, built a system in which the invisible could condemn the innocent.